Good afternoon, everybody. Forgive me a little bit if I'm a little skitsy here and there. Jet lag is still working me over. I flew in yesterday from the US. All right, space sleep, legal implications. I want you to imagine for a second Georgi or Luca's mission. Except for it's manned, you are personally going to a moon. Not Earth moon, another moon far away. You have several years planned. And yeah, there's other options out there, but your company decided to go with cryogenics. They're going to freeze you, prevent bodily decay, bone decay. They're going to bring you back when you arrive at the moon, and life is going to be fantastic. You're finally going to get to study that ice sample you were looking forward to, maybe find that life in outer space you were hoping to see. It's going to be amazing. So you go to sleep. You wake up. You're not at the moon. In fact, it's been 100 years. You're at some mining establishment in deep space, and you are now basically free labor for some corporation that deceived you. What you need at this point in your life is a space lawyer. And that's what I want to be. My dream mission is to protect you in exploring your dream mission. And this seems kind of ridiculous. I mean, I'm going to come right back here. We talk about science fiction a lot, and that's what leads us to actual science. But all of these things have, behind the stage, legal ramifications. And while I'm only going to be looking at one specific, really science fiction aspect of those legal ramifications, this is something we need to be looking at across the entire spectrum of space activity. What laws apply? What happens when we apply those laws, and what are some of the ramifications that we did not foresee? So, space lawyer. Just so you know, I'm in law school. I'll be finishing up this fall. The reason I looked into space law is when I was deciding to become a lawyer, I saw an ad for a space lawyer, and the description said, must relocate to Alexandria, Virginia, Earth. And I was like, Earth? What the heck? I mean, most people would put like maybe USA there if there were some question, but why Earth? The next sentence, no space travel required at this time. And I was like, sign me up. I want to go to space. I want to be a space lawyer. I want to practice space law, but I'd also like to practice law in space. I want to try the first trial in space. Now, there are lots of ways that we could potentially travel long distance in outer space. You got ideas like generation ships, embryo colonization, and TV shows have been made about some of these concepts. We have time dilation, constant acceleration, the uploaded astronaut. Actually, I think our keynote speaker at the very beginning mentioned data transferred astronaut, so you don't actually have to go into space yourself. It's very related to that concept. But I'm looking specifically at cold storage. We're going to freeze your body, and we're going to send you out there so we don't have any decay. Now, this is from a movie. It's called Passengers, 2016. In this movie, a guy wakes up early on accident, and then he decides, I'm going to wake up this hot chick. Pretty sure that's illegal. In fact, under US law, murder is defined as the acceleration of a person towards their death. Pretty sure she was accelerated by a couple hundred years. So he's complicit in her murder. So yeah, I want to protect people like her from creeps like him. Now, the most popular cryo-freezing is Han Solo in Star Wars. And this isn't all science fiction. I mean, it may seem that way. This is what we see in the media all the time, but there are actual people who have been frozen today. The very first person ever frozen, successfully, James Buford. United States, California, 1976. He was frozen. His family literally just packed him in ice, shoved him into this container, and prayed and hoped for the best. Now, he's not in that same container. His body was transferred to a company called Alcor, and it's the largest cryogenics facility in the world with over 200 people frozen, either full body or just head up. But they're not the only company in the world that does this. There are several companies. In Europe, there is, it's called Tomorrow Bio. It's located in Berlin. Moscow, Russia has Cryogenics. China has the Shandong Yinfeng Ling Life Science Research Institute, and there are a couple others in the US as well. Cryogenics is not just science fiction. Bringing them back might be science fiction still, but we're working on that. And here's the science to show you that it's not just science fiction. In the 1980s, they proposed a new form of freezing, a stasis, called vitrification. Prior to that, we literally took the body, stuffed it with ice, and shoved it in a container and prayed for the best. Vitrification is the process of a quick freeze that turns your liquid in your body not into ice, which could form crystals and damage cellular structure, but rather it takes it and turns it into a glassification type state. That's what vitrification is, to make into a liquid glass. It's an almost instant process using chemicals to preserve your body's structure. That way, when you are frozen, we don't destroy your cells. And in the 1980s, they started proposing this process, and in the 1990s, they actually successfully vitrified a human embryo, which is the gamete portion before any sort of cellular division occurring to create life. That gamete was frozen and then later on unfrozen in a ramification process that then was placed inside of a woman and born as a child. And so the first person born through vitrification occurred in the 1990s. And it was shortly thereafter that cryogenic companies such as Alcor and Cryogenics Institute adopted the vitrification process for those who were going to be cryogenically frozen. Now, stage one, preserving the tissue, is extremely important in successful cryogenesis. Stage two, the more important piece, is preserving memory. And that we actually have also done. In 2016, they froze through cryogenic preservation worms. Now, that's kind of exciting, right? Well, what they did with these worms is they trained them with a chemical scent to follow that scent to food. They froze the worm, and then a time later, unfroze the worm. They placed the worm in a similar situation, and the majority of times, that worm retained the memory and knew to follow the scent to the food source. And so we're able to show that memory retention occurs through vitrification, and tissue and life preservation is able to also occur. The next step, of course, is doing that to a full-size human, much more complex than a worm, but we're working towards that process. Over the past 8 years, they have vitrified kidneys for rabbits and done successful transplants into other rabbits where the organ maintained viability and continued to work inside of the new rabbit. And so this development, the scientific process is ongoing 50 to 100 years less. Many people think who are involved in this process that will be successful. Now, let's move on to the current law. Now, these laws are current for the United States. These are quotes from US law and court cases, but there are parallel principles and laws in most nations of the world. In the US, death is defined as an individual must have sustained either irreversible cessation of circulatory and respiratory functions or irreversible cessation of all functions of the entire brain, including the brain stem. Irreversible is the key word I want to look at here. Because cryogenics, or cryonics, the low temperature freezing and storage of a human with the speculative hope that revivification may be possible in the future. Does that sound irreversible to you? It does not to me. And the problem, the reason this is a problem is because under current case law in the US, the legal requirement is that a person is dead before they are cryogenically frozen. That is an instant, they just don't work together. That's a contradiction. You have to be dead in order to be frozen, but you cannot be frozen because you're not dead yet, but you want to come back, but you can't because you're dead. It really hurt my head. When I read about this, I was like, what the heck? This creates so many potential problems. So I started looking into those problems, and currently, the way they've solved this problem, and this is actually being taught by those who actually look at the process. The current process is when you are frozen, you will come back as a new person. You version 2.0. You might have the same name, you might not. In the US, we use Social Security numbers as our federal identification number. You would have a new Social Security number. Okay, this creates problems. Insurance fraud. Okay, that's the first problem that comes to my mind. I have a life insurance policy for $10 million, and it's going to go to my wife when I die. So I get cryogenically frozen, and a year later I come back. Hey, hon, let's get married again. I'm a new person. We've got $10 million. I love this. Let's do it again. Extinguishment of valid debt. Hey, I'm going to take that $10 million and going down to Las Vegas. I'm going to gamble it all away and maybe pull out another $10 million in debt. And oh, that didn't work out so well. Let's freeze myself and come back. Hey, I'm a new person. I have no debt. Criminal record. I lied. Maybe killed somebody. They really pissed me off. Well, you know what? If I'm a new person, I don't have a criminal record. I am legally a new person. This actually has some more personal ramifications. I have family members who are on the sex offender registry in the US. I do not want them to be cryogenically frozen under the current law. It's not safe for other people. There are bad people out there who will abuse the system. So this law, this system doesn't work for me. Property inheritance issues. Okay, you die, children inherit your stuff. You come back 10,000 years later, 1,000 years later, 100 years later even. That stuff is not yours, but you might want to think it is. Who actually has ownership of that property? If you're a new person, they do. No questions asked. But, I think there's a basis to walk into a courtroom and say, look, I'm the same person. I'm biologically exactly the same. I should get my stuff. So there'll be court cases on that. And we need to solve those problems. Now, obviously, all these problems are under the current system. There's an obviously, it just makes sense, an alternative here. Let's just make you you. Let's not have a new person. Let's actually write a law that says you are reestablished as you. Well, that also has some major problems. Again, property issues, I'm not going to get into this in depth. You can read my paper if you want. But if you're you and it's 10,000 years later, who has your property now? They have it, they legally bought it from somebody else, maybe. Maybe they inherited it from their father, who inherited it from their father for 20 generations. And now you're coming along and you're going to take it back? How is that fair to them? So we have a reverse property issue here. Copyright law, life of the author. In the United States, you write a book, you have ownership of the profits of that book for your life, and then for X years after your life, your children or your inheritor would receive those rights. Well, now you come back 200 years later, still your life. Do you get all the profits backdated 200 years? What about the people who supposedly had those rights? Now you're taking that over from them? Life prison sentencing. Okay, yeah, we talk about the murderer who's getting 5 life sentences, and, well, we just know we're locking them away for life. But could the government at this point now say, okay, let's freeze them for 5 lifetimes? 500 years forced imprisonment, you're brought out, and you just think the past 50 years. 50 years ago, we did not have the internet. 500 years in the future, what kind of a culture shock would that bring to that person? So honestly, I don't care about the mass murderer. I'd say, leave him in prison for life. That's fine with me. But there are some human rights issues that could come with a government entity abusing this process of cryogenics. All right, so solutions. I'm not going to say I have the solution that would solve all these problems, but that's what I do. I think about what are the implications and what are some possible fixes to these problems. And I would say a continuity, an informed you. Yes, you're still you, but you're informed as to the implications that are going to be required of you if you are cryogenically frozen. You if you're cryogenically frozen, would legally forfeit all of your property except a small amount which could be put into a limited trust. And that's actually how Alcor runs their program in the United States. You were able to put in a certain amount of money into a trust which they maintain for you until your revification. And once you are brought back, you will have access to those trust funds. Insurance reclamation and informed policies. If you're going to be cryogenically frozen, your insurance company must be informed, and they will have first dibs access to your trust upon revification, so they can reclaim any property so you're not at fault for fraud. Continuity of records. Anything that was attached to you at life will remain attached to you through your cryogenesis and brought with you through revification. If your body is transported from one jurisdiction to another, your records go with you in that jurisdiction. Establishment of rights. Something needs to be done so we are clear what the government can and cannot do in relation to you and your rights, even though you may or may not be dead. Now, I barely touched on these issues in this presentation. If you are interested in reading my paper, this link will take you to a PDF copy. I want feedback. I have put off finalizing my paper so I can get feedback. I want to know what you think about these legal ramifications and issues, how we can possibly solve this problem or any other space legal problem. This is what I like to do. I like to think about this. And I really appreciate Bram and Skag in bringing me here the opportunity to present these ideas. Thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful day.